Okay, so physical and cognitive development in early childhood. We are talking about preschool age children here, about ages 2 to 5. They are growing quite a bit. They're gaining weight also, not quite as much as they did in their first year or two. And they may start to lose their baby teeth at this age. Okay, so during this time, the brain is still rapidly developing, particularly the prefrontal cortex, and the hemispheres are continuing to lateralize. Children will start to show a preference for right or left hand. Many children will, some not yet, but um, there are some things that can influence children's left-handedness, right-handedness preference. Some of it has to do with nature, their genetic makeup, and also what their influence is. So, for example, my grandmother, who was born, in the early 1900s, was probably most likely a lefty. She was really encouraged to use her right hand entirely in school. So later in life, she was really sort of ambidextrous. But nowadays, obviously, children are allowed to use whatever their preferred hand is, which is, of course, much more appropriate for their development. So their language skills are developing pretty rapidly. Certainly from 2 to 5, you notice a dramatic increase in their ability to communicate. The brain starts to, really develop and work together. The parts of the brain that help with things like memory and recall and regulation and balance are all really developing. If you go to the attached PowerPoint, you can click on this and look at a short explanation about how this corpus callosum is involved with handedness and how the brain works together and things like that. Nutrition is very important at this age. Children need to be exposed to a variety of types of food. You see Maddie here when she was very little. So children many times at this age also will kind of seem to exist on air. Many children will. They'll sort of eat, large amounts and then skip 3 meals, it seems like, and then eat again a large amount. So it's just important to always provide nutritious food as much as possible. Obviously, it's not always possible to always provide nutritious food, but as often as possible, present different options to children and just try to maintain a positive attitude around eating. So again, their appetite does decline. Some children really develop a dislike for new foods. They really just want to stick to the same types of food or same food. Again, as long as you are trying to introduce healthy food and repeatedly exposing children to these healthy foods. I forget that it takes at least 7 times or 15 times for a child to try a new food before they can really assess whether they like it or not. This can be very difficult. So again, just continuing to present a variety of healthy foods in a positive way is really the best way to approach it at this age. So one of the reasons why researchers kind of believe that children at this age are so wary of new foods is that, for a child of this age, this 2 to 5 range, they are exposed to so many new things every day and so many changes and things that they're learning and being exposed to. And that maybe this sort of wariness of new foods is kind of a way of it's just something they would rather stick to what they like, stick to what's familiar, because there's so much variety in their day-to-day life. As adults, we have much less variety in our day-to-day life. We're not really seeing things for the first time on a regular basis every day. And some researchers hypothesize that adults, want to explore new things through food because our day-to-day life is somewhat routine. although not this year. Poor quality diet can affect, especially in the extreme, can affect cognitive development. Children at this age still need a good quantity of fat in their diet, of healthy fat, vegetables with fat like avocado, not a lot of animal fat, nuts and seeds and things like that. Um, Again, to help support brain development. And irregular eating, or being hungry or being fed terrible food, can affect behavior as well. In the extreme, poor diet can certainly affect children's immune systems. So that is a good healthy diet is part of building a strong immune system for children. What can happen is children whose immune system is not functioning properly, they are more susceptible to illness. And any of us who have been sick know many times when you're sick, you really don't feel like eating much of anything. So it sort of creates this cycle. Also, in extremes, in parts of the world where, in developing countries where food supplies are really um, heavily affected, children can develop severe malnutrition and many physical issues because of that. Immunizations in the United States are mandatory for school enrollment. There have been a lot of controversies about vaccinations for children. All of the studies that have been done on immunizations and autism have shown that there is no link between autism or vaccines and autism. Um, Again, that's a topic that you could certainly bring up in the discussion area. And this topic will come up again certainly as the COVID vaccine is developed. Will that be mandatory for school enrollment? Should it be mandatory? Will a flu vaccine be mandatory? What are the consequences of reducing those mandates? So there were parts of the country that had measles outbreaks because children were allowed to not have these measles vaccines or be under vaccinated. What are some of the consequences of that? Again, all topics for possible discussion. There does seem to be a slight increase in childhood injuries based on gender. It's relatively slight, but boys are a little bit more likely to be injured. Temperament is really something that can significantly affect a child's injury rate. Children who are just naturally more curious and outgoing and daring, are just more likely to get injured. Other environmental factors can affect childhood injuries. And, in the case of severe injuries, children may be at risk if they are getting repetitive severe injuries. That may be an indication that there is an issue at home or in the child care setting that needs to be investigated. But children of this age will get injured. They do fall down when they run, and they fall down off of playground equipment. And so every attempt should be made to minimize, obviously, severe injuries, but they are going to happen at this age. Just a quick overview. The United States falls about in the middle of death rates due to injury. Typically, motor vehicle accidents and things like drownings are pretty high up in the causes of child. And so, again, all attempts must be made to reduce these injuries as much as possible. So, while they're developing all of these motor skills, of course, you can see how injuries can happen. Their balance is improving, but it's a process. Their gait, their ability to run and walk and jump and skip and all of that becomes smoother. Their upper and lower body skills are increasing and improving. And all of this all of these gross motor skills and many of these fine motor skills, the best way to develop these, the best way to improve these is through play. So play is what helps children to build these skills. Outdoor play in particular is very important for this age group. Drawing and coloring and things like that are also very important. And children's ability with drawing typically progress in a very predictable way. And so they start with, drawings that barely really look like people. Some people refer to these as tadpole people. You can see how they're these big heads and like stick legs, and that's about it. As they get into their early school years, their drawings become, a little bit more refined and a little bit more complex and involve objects and animals as well. And depending on the school and depending on the child, children can start to write around the age of 4. Some of them are able to write their names a little bit before that, or start to write parts of their names around the age of 3 to 4. In general, this is a generalization about boys generally excel in skills using strength. Girls tend to be better at balance and agility. And so is this a matter, again, of biology? Is this something that girls versus boys are born with, or is this nurture? Are boys more encouraged to be, strong and powerful, and girls are, more encouraged to be, walk carefully or things like that? Practice is certainly something that can affect physical development. And again, this is why play is very important. This is why outdoor play is very important. Again, if you click on the PowerPoint linked below, and I believe I linked this in the discussion area as well. This is a little video that looks at the myth of throwing like a girl. So check out that video. Okay, Piaget. So now we are in Piaget's pre-operational stage. Make-believe is very important. Dual representation, children start to learn that objects can symbolize something that, the car that goes or something like that is a book that's really popular for that age. So children can start to recognize that things can do more than one thing, or that pictures can represent actions and things like that. Children at this age are considered relatively egocentric. That means they believe that the world sort of revolves around them. And it's not in a bad way. This is just a normal part of a child's cognitive development. Things that they do, children believe, have an effect on the world around them pretty significantly. So they are also developing this skill of conservation. So in the next few slides, we're going to look at some of these skills that children are developing. Okay, so make-believe is a very important skill for children. Pretending at this age. They will use a lot of objects in their play to represent other things. This brick could be an iron, it could be a step, it could be a phone, it could be whatever. They start to play with other children more. They move away from parallel play of very young children where they sort of play next to each other but not really together. Preschool children obviously are playing a significant amount of time together. And how is this going to be affected by the COVID crisis? Children have not been allowed to play together in close proximity, and certainly if they have been, it's all been outdoors. So what's going to happen in the coming months as the weather gets colder and children, really need to be indoors more? How will that be affected? So again, make-believe is a very important part of play. It helps children develop their abilities to pay attention and to pay attention longer. They get really engaged in these games. It helps build their memory skills and certainly their language and even literacy skills, learning about, they may be retelling a story while they're playing. And, playing with others is very important, taking on the perspective of others. I'm going to play the mom, I'm going to play the teacher, I'm going to play the doctor, I'm going to play the, whatever. Play is also used with children at this age in therapy. So, if a child were to need therapy for one reason or another, for emotional, social, cognitive support, even physical support, it's something like occupational therapy for children. For adults, that helps us to regain our skills to be able to do our tasks of daily living. For children, occupational therapy would be to use play to help them build their skills of daily living. So play is used in therapy. Play is beneficial to children. It's essential. So this dual representation, knowing that symbols can represent something else. Again, children are starting to develop this in their early years. It strengthens around the age of 8, and you'll see this in a lot of preschool type classrooms where there's so many pictures on the wall, and there's the weather board, and children will use the sun to say this is a sunny day, it's a cloudy day, that kind of thing. So like I said, egocentrism, just means that children really see the world from their own perspective. They're still developing the ability to see the world from another child's perspective or another individual's perspective. They believe that objects or non-human inanimate objects can kind of come to life and take on the qualities of a person, so things like leprechauns and all that kind of stuff. It's a normal part of development. And conservation. This is Piaget's idea about how children look at objects and their ability to manipulate objects and understand that the physical characteristics stay the same even if the appearance changes. So children at this age are not able to understand that. And the classic example, here, I'll go to the next. This is my sort of least favorite example with children. If you were to pour 8 ounces of juice into a tall, skinny cup, and then right in front of the children, pour 8 ounces of juice into a shorter, wider cup, what would the children say about this? And before they've developed the ability of conservation, they will say that the taller one has more, or the one that they think is bigger has more. Even if you pour it back and forth in front of them, they will, choose a preference for the one that they think is bigger. They are not able to understand that changing the shape of an object doesn't change the size of an object. So a quick review of this pre-operational thought. Children are starting to, another important thing that they're doing in this age group is categorization. They're starting to be able to categorize objects, and it gets more sophisticated as they get older, but they have some basic categorization abilities. And one of the ways to strengthen this is through cleaning up after their play. So the balls go in that box, and the blankets go in that box, and the blocks go over here, that kind of thing. There are many things that are beneficial to having children clean up. First of all, it's teaching them to clean up after themselves and to work with others, but also you're building that ability to categorize. So like any other theorist, Piaget has some detractors, some critics of his theory. Um, Modern researchers believe that their their cognitive abilities develop more gradually and really with more experience. And some experts entirely don't believe in Piaget's stages at all. So, like any other theorist, there are always critics. Piaget referred to this private speech that children have as egocentric speech. This is something that all, researchers believe exists, that children have this, like adults, ongoing voice in their head. Um, Young children, as they're learning to talk, will many times vocalize what's going on in their head. And honestly, some of us, even as adults, we do this. If we're trying to figure something out or remember something, we might say it out loud to remind ourselves, or, say things like, "What did I come in this room for?" The older we get, we may say things like that. Um, so young children, many times see them playing and again, really working, and they'll sort of talk out what they're doing. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to put this over here. And this gradually decreases and becomes more of that inner speech that we see in adults, or that all of us have as adults. Vygotsky believed in this idea of scaffolding, which is where adults basically serve as that scaffolding support for children while they're learning a new skill. So adults are there kind of right next to the child or right with the child to help them as they are learning, and gradually will pull away the support. Okay, so scaffolding also allows for modeling so that the adult can do the activity and the child can watch the adult do the activity and then follow and learn from watching as well. And then the child can get some support from the adults that are there. So Vygotsky helps us to understand how children in different cultures and with different environments can develop. It helps focus on their language development and what language is supportive for children. It doesn't necessarily explain how their other abilities help contribute to cognitive process. So, how are those abilities to see and pay attention, as those improve? How does that, with the child, how does that help support their cognitive process? Children are developing in other areas of development besides physically, and really their cognitive process develops also. So their ability to pay attention increases as they get older. Their ability to inhibit or to prevent themselves from doing something, or to wait to do something, and to plan ahead. Okay, tomorrow we're going to do this kind of thing. Thinking in the future a little bit. Again, it starts as a gradual process and builds every year. Their memory improves, their ability to recognize things, their ability to recall things from memory. So recognizing pictures of family or things that they've seen before, but also to recall from memory. So, my dog's name is blank or whatever, to tell the class that. Their episodic memory improves. So episodic memory is, I always think of it as it's an episode. So, an episode of a show is you retell what happened in this event. Children increase in their ability to do that. They are they're considered emergent readers, which means they're in the process of learning to read. They're learning to recognize letters. And they do have mathematical abilities. They start to, you see here children playing at a water table. This is a really important tool to help build mathematical reasoning. So, you can add things to one container and make it more in this container. That's all early math, early reasoning skills. And again, you can see how play is important for that. Okay, so we just went over recognition is, noticing that this is similar to this, or this is a picture of what this is. Recall is sort of recalling it from memory. So retelling a story, it's generally a little bit more difficult than recognition. So if you've ever tried to think of a name that you can't remember, that tip of the tongue phenomenon is more difficult than if you were given, say, two names and you had to recognize which one it was, or things like a multiple choice test versus a fill in the blank test. So again, early literacy is very important. Exposing children to multiple books, multiple reading sources. Nowadays, I saw this with my daughter's experience in elementary school. Librarians and reading teachers and teachers of all kinds are much more supportive of children hearing audiobooks. That would always count for my daughter when she was an early reader, and they have to count, how many hours or how many books they've read or whatever. And the librarian said, no, audiobooks count. And so that was a really great tool for my daughter, and to be able to listen to a book on tape, or, a digital book at this point. Children are building their knowledge of those phonemes and morphemes, those letters and the two letter combinations and the small parts of the words that all make up, the bigger words that we use. They're starting to learn obviously more vocabulary every day, and grammar, so how those sentences are supposed to be put together. So there's a lot available to help support early readers, and it's very, very important. Reading is very important to stress it an early age and all through, particularly elementary school. So when you're looking at a school or a caregiver environment, some of the things that are really important is the physical setting. Is it child friendly? Is it safe? What's the group size? How many children to each caregiver? Depending on the age of the children and the needs of the children and the skill of the caregivers, that will depend. And those are all regulated by state guidelines that should be readily available to you if you're looking at a center or a school. There should be multiple daily activities. There should be organized activities. There should be free play time, lots of involvement from the teachers and other adults in the classroom. What's the relationship with parents? Are parents allowed in the classroom? Are they encouraged to come to the classroom? And then, of course, you always want to make sure that the setting is licensed and has the proper accreditation and licensing. Okay, so educational media. In every other semester that I've taught developmental psych for the last 17 years, I would say, we've talked about how excessive entertainment TV can be harmful to children. Now, we started talking about TV a long time ago. Now it's media of all kinds. It's the screen time, right, that we look at for children. How much time are children spending in front of a screen? For this age group, the American Academy of Pediatrics really recommended none, or really less than 30 minutes a day for children of 2 to 5 years of age. Nowadays, and again, feel free to bring this up in the discussion, is that even possible? Are there parents that can do this? Is it a good idea to recommend preschool online for children? Is that even something that children's brains can benefit from, or would it be more harmful than good? What else could parents do to make sure that the children are getting some of these early experiences? So this has put us in a whole different category of discussion for sort of screen time for this age group in particular. So vocabulary-wise, I mentioned this a little bit before, that their vocabularies, again, expanding every day. They will use new words. They'll make new words up of their own. Sometimes these words will sort of disappear. Sometimes these words will, become words that the children uses for, for a while. They start to use action words and adverbs and adjectives to describe nouns and describe verbs. So fast and slow and quickly and all sorts of things like that. They use metaphors so they can sort of make comparisons from one thing to another with their language. They start to be really good at conversation, so they need that back and forth. That's really essential for building language. Children don't learn language from TV. So yes, they may pick up a few words here and there, but in order to fully develop a language capacity, they need that interactive speech with another individual. Um, so conversation is what really builds speech. It is more difficult, particularly at the younger age, to understand children on telephone calls, or if you've lately had to have a Zoom call with a 3 or 4 year old. Um, at best, it is short term. Again, their attention is not great. They may be more difficult to understand because their language is developing, their ability to speak properly is developing. All right, so I look forward to some of your discussion topics, and send me an email if you have any questions or concerns.